Diffusion, the international science radio show.
Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Edwards. I work for the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service.
How would you phrase it, what your research is about?
So at the moment, I actually work on the feral cat research team. So I'm looking at sort of the best method to control feral cats in national parks. And then the work that we were doing in the video was to look at how feral cats are impacting the native species and whether our control methods on cats are being reflected with that next step into the native species sort of recovery.
And what are you finding? Well, should I ask you first how you're doing that?
Well, the project's actually in its first year. So this year we're just getting baseline measures. We haven't started any treatments or trials or anything. So this year we're measuring, we're going to do an experiment where we're going to look at who actually takes the baits that national parks put out. So we've got some baits that we'll be putting in front of cameras. So we'll know what's happening to the baits, who's taking them, that sort of stuff. And then to see that sort of flow on, we'll also be catching cats and putting collars on them, tracking them through the rest of their life until the end of the project. And for the native species, we've got, and the predators as well, we've got a lot of cameras out in the field. So we monitor with lots of different cameras. And then we also do pitfall trapping twice a year in spring and autumn. And the pitfall trapping is what catches the small native animals. We've got reptiles during the day and then reptiles and small mammals at night.
So you must have to go into the field a lot.
Yeah, so this year it's been nearly 50% of the time. We've been out 1 week on, 1 week off, sort of since about February. We are due to go back out in 2 days' time and we'll be out for 3 weeks. So that's a pretty big trip.
And so you have to dig all these holes, the pitfalls, and then how long do you wait before you go and check them?
So the pitfall holes we only dig in once because we've had to dig 450 and it's taken us weeks and weeks. We then run the drift fences across the top of the holes and they also stay out there. So when we're not in the field, we just have lids on the holes so nothing can get caught in them. So what we'll do when we head out next week is we'll pull all the lids off and everything's basically set up, ready to go. And we'll start checking that afternoon. And last time we opened traps in the morning at 9, 10 o'clock and we had lizards by the afternoon. So it's pretty quick. Each site we only trap for 4 nights. And that gives us a pretty good census of what's around.
And will this give you an idea of the number of feral cats that are predating on these animals?
The pitfalling that we're doing won't really give us an indication of feral cat predation, but if we're able to bring the numbers down, we may in the future see a rise in what would have been their prey. So yeah, what we're getting this time is just a baseline of who lives there, how many there might be, and it's pretty simple stuff.
And I guess in New South Wales, there's nothing that predates on the cats.
Yeah, not really. You know, you might have something take kittens, an eagle or someone else that's hanging around, a dingo maybe, wild dog. But yeah, cats don't have a lot of predators themselves.
Do we have many dingoes in New South Wales?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. Yeah, we have, dingoes, wild dogs, whether or not they're pure dingoes or however people tend to look at dingoes. But we've definitely got some sandy coloured wild dogs walking around out there. I would say they're covering most of New South Wales.
And how did you come to look the effects of the feral cats?
So I've always sort of been interested in conservation projects. I did my PhD in my first postdoc on sort of captive breeding, sex ratios and that sort of stuff. And for me, it was sort of, it's conservation work, but it was one step removed. So I was sort of getting the information that maybe someone else could use to make a difference, which is why I sort of moved into national parks. So now we're still doing research, we're on the ground, and we're, you know, actually using the knowledge that we have and that others have to actually perform conservation work. So that's sort of why I moved into it.
And so that must be quite a career path. Did you decide from the beginning that conservation was why you were doing science?
Not really. When I first left school and started my Bachelor of Science, I actually started in chemistry and physics, which was really just because I had a really good chemistry teacher in high school. And then when I got to university, I realized that I didn't like chemistry at all, and what I actually wanted to do was just cuddle animals. So I did my honours and my PhD and decided that I was, you know, going to go down the road of being a zoologist rather than a vet. I want to help animals, but I don't necessarily want to spend my days with cats and dogs and dealing with ill animals that vets have, you know, sick and dying animals all the time. I'd rather something that's happy and healthy and running around the bush, but I still need to cuddle it. That's why I like trapping. So I guess the conservation has always sort of been there. But yeah, it was probably more just the cuddling was how I got into it. I just want to play with animals all day and have someone pay me to do it.
It's a large number of animals that you have to get all the information about, to learn about, to be able to do your work.
Yeah, there's, I guess, like, you get like a baseline level of information that kind of, for me, I've always focused on mammals. So I know a little bit about birds and reptiles and fish, and I did a bit of marine. But yeah, there's, you know, even if you're focused on one group of mammals, you're just looking at so much variation and so much knowledge. And unless you specialize on one species that lives in one area that doesn't have any variation, then there's just going to be so much that you don't know.
Tell me about the wallabies.
So during a postdoc that I did at La Trobe University in Melbourne, I was working on Tamar wallabies over on Kangaroo Island. And we were actually looking at whether we could work out the sex of the sperm of the wallaby. So we would take a sample from a male and then take it back to the lab and essentially use pieces of DNA to make the sperm glow different colors if it had an X chromosome and would be a girl, or a Y chromosome that would end up being a boy. And then we would sit in a dark room and count thousands upon thousands of sperm to see whether there was actually equal numbers, because science predicts that there should be. But in everything that we've ever measured, it's not. So we went over and studied this wild population of wallabies, and we more or less expected it to be 50-50. But we ended up seeing a huge Y bias, quite significant Y bias, so tending towards male offspring. And we thought, well, that's super weird. So we actually decided, like, really quick, pack our bags, let's go back and see what the babies are. So we went over and we started catching wallabies, and what we found was that the babies that were just being born were also male biased. And we thought, maybe there's actually something here. But then we started looking at the older babies, and it had flipped. And by the time the babies were sort of large pouch young, getting ready to leave the pouch, there was significantly more females. So what we think is happening is that mothers and fathers have different reasons for wanting sons and daughters. The fathers were invested in having sons, while the mothers were invested in having daughters. And a lot of mothers that ended up with sons had lost them and started a new pregnancy. And only the mothers who had daughters kept the baby until it was grown up. So it was this sort of conflict between what the parents wanted, and in the end the mother won because she was the one carrying the baby.
It almost sounds like there'd be no males left.
I mean, that happens in some populations. That was why I was initially looking at sex ratios. It happens a lot in captivity. But the other way around, in captivity, you have a lot of boy babies and not a lot of girls.
Oh,
And
so
that's
it just depends. So you were involved with Young Tassie Scientists and Science Week. What were you doing?
So I've been involved with the Young Tassie Scientists for about 6 years. I started in, I think, the second year of my PhD. And when I started, it was, I think I did one week-long road trip, and I went out to schools and did 10-minute science shows. And I wasn't overly confident at the time. I was working on sex ratios and sex, and there is no way to talk to 7-year-olds about that and to make that interesting. And I really struggled. And working with the Young Tassie Scientists and going for so many years, after I think about year 3 or 4, I started doing sex shows in schools. And I would talk to even the little kids about, sex ratios and offspring and where do babies come from and who are mammals. And in the end, we would make butter from cream. And we'd talk about, butter and cream come from milk, and why is milk important, and mammals have milk. And these little kids would get really into it. And the older kids, I would, of course, embarrass them and actually talk about my research and sperm sex ratios and make them all giggle, and the teachers would have a great time. And I think having so much fun is why I stuck around. In the end, I was going out on multiple trips, and I've been to every corner of Tasmania with the Young Tassie Scientists, visited so many schools and done so many shows, and you just get this feedback from working with kids and with the public, and it just re-energizes your love of science, I guess, and why you're doing the things you're doing. And this year I've done it all by distance. I actually left Tassie 4 years ago, and I've still been in the Young Tassie Scientists. So I've travelled back every year except for this year. This year it was all shot on video out in my national parks here.
And did you get any fun questions from the kids?
This year I had probably the most interesting question that I've ever been asked. So usually, being a zoologist, they get, what's your favourite animal? And, have you ever travelled overseas to see the lions? And they're great questions, but I had one kid ask whether I'd ever gotten into trouble or what was the most dangerous thing that had happened while I was doing science. And that was a great question. I've definitely made some really questionable choices. So that was really fun to sort of, share some experiences that I had with kids while I was, traveling overseas and that sort of stuff, and doing science in other places. And I think they really liked hearing that as well, that we all make bad choices sometimes.
Does it get dangerous out there in New South Wales?
I mean, it can do, particularly, I guess, if you're doing nighttime fieldwork. New South Wales, Tassie, Victoria, I've done nighttime fieldwork in all of them. And there's often people out in the bush that maybe shouldn't be out there at 2 a.m. and, we're trying to catch platypus or catch wallabies, and yeah, there's always someone hanging around, and it can be a little bit scary.
And with Conservancy, if you had if you had a message for listeners about conservation, particularly Australian wildlife, is there anything you'd say to them about things they should do or not do? A call to action?
I think the biggest thing with conservation in Australia is education. Learn as much as you can. Educate people. If you know interesting facts, get people interested. The only way we can save the animals here is if everyone falls in love with them. And I guess the second thing is, even though you're just one person, you still matter. Your choices still matter. Obviously, big businesses could make a big difference, but that's not to say that the choices that you make at home and when you go out on bushwalks or go into national parks, the choices that you make still matter, even if it's just a 1 or 2 animals that encounters you or your litter or whatever you happen to be doing out there.
And so what will be the next steps with the Feral Cat project?
So the Feral Cat project's going to be running for the next, I guess, 4 and a bit years. It's going to be pretty intense. We're hoping that in the next 3 to 4 years, we can develop a really good method to help get cats under control. And then in our last year, we're really going to take everything we've learned and try and have a really big impact on the national parks that we're working in, and see if we can't do something really good for the native species that are out there that just need to have a little less stress from a little less predators that don't need to be there.
And do you have anything for the people that might be looking at studying zoology? Any advice?
My advice is always just to keep trying. Just stay interested, stay focused. If there's something that you want to work on and that you want to do, if you want to go and spend your days cuddling animals, just work hard, keep trying for it, and you'll get there. I worked hard during school, during uni, and now I have a great job and I get paid really well to cuddle a lot of animals. It's pretty amazing. I'd definitely say if you're interested, you should follow it. It's a good dream. It's a good career.
Excellent. Well, Amy, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.